Hi, boys and girls. Looks like we have a few folks on here already. It's great to see you all. Yay! Okay, so today we're going to read two more chapters. We're going to read The Family Begins to Starve, and then we're reading the next chapter, The Miracle. So remember, we left off that Grandpa Joe had saved some money in his little pouch, and they had enough to buy another chocolate bar. And they went and bought it. They opened it up, and they were so excited, and no chocolate. Or there was chocolate, no golden ticket. And there's only one golden ticket left. All right, so let's read on to find out what happens. So remember, this chapter is called The Family Begins to Starve. During the next 2 weeks, the weather turned very cold. First came the snow. It began very suddenly one morning, just as Charlie Bucket was getting dressed for school. Standing by the window, he saw huge flakes drifting down out of an icy sky that was the color of steel, very gray. By evening, it lay 4 feet deep around the tiny house, and Mr. Bucket had to dig a path from the front door to the road. After the snow, there came a freezing gale that blew for days and days without stopping. So that's a wind. Oh, how bitter and cold it was. Everything that Charlie touched seemed to be made of ice, and each time he stepped outside the door, the wind was like a knife on his cheek. It just shocked him real sharp. Inside the house, little jets of freezing air came rushing in through the sides of the windows and under the doors, and there was no place to escape them. The 4 old ones lay silent and huddled in their bed, trying to keep the cold out of their bones. The excitement over the golden tickets had long since been forgotten. Nobody in the family gave a thought now to anything except the two vital problems of trying to keep warm and trying to get enough to eat. There is something about very cold weather that gives one an enormous appetite. Oh, hungry. Most of us find ourselves beginning to crave rich, steaming stews and hot apple pies and all kinds of delicious, warming dishes. And because we are all a great deal luckier than we realize, we usually get what we want or near enough. But Charlie Bucket never got what he wanted because the family couldn't afford it. And as the cold weather went on and on, he became ravenously hungry and desperately hungry. It's been nibbled away. And all he got now were those thin, cabbagey meals 3 times a day. So cabbage soup 3 times a day. Then all at once, the meals became even thinner. The reason for this was the toothpaste factory, the place where Mr. Bucket worked, suddenly went bust and they had to close down. Quickly, Mr. Bucket tried to get another job, but he had no luck. In the end, the only way in which he managed to earn a few pennies was by shoveling snow in the streets. But it wasn't enough to buy even a quarter of the food that 7 people needed. The situation became desperate. Breakfast was a single slice of bread for each person now, and lunch was maybe half a boiled potato. Slowly but surely, everybody in the house began to starve. And every day, little Charlie Bucket, trudging in the snow on his way to school, would pass by Mr. Willy Wonka's giant chocolate factory. And every single day, as he came near to it, he would lift his small, pointed nose high in the air and sniff the wonderful, sweet smell of melting chocolate. Sometimes he would stand motionless outside the gates for several minutes on end, taking deep, swallowing breaths as though he were trying to eat the smell itself. "That child," said Grandpa Joe, poking his head up from under the blanket one icy morning, "that child has got to have more food. It doesn't matter about us. We're too old to bother with. But a growing boy? He can't go on like this. He's beginning to look like a skeleton." "What can we do?" murmured Grandma Josephine miserably. "He refuses to take any of ours. I hear his mother tried to slip him her own piece of bread on his plate at breakfast this morning, but he wouldn't touch it. He made her take it back." That's the end of the chapter. Oh, no, it's not. A little bit more. There's a picture. I'll show you guys. All right. That looks like the gate of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, or Mr. Willy Wonka's Chocolate Factory. "He's a fine little fella," said Grandpa George. "He deserves better than this." The cruel weather went on, and every day Charlie Bucket grew thinner and thinner. His face became frighteningly white and pinched. The skin was drawn so tightly over the cheeks that you could see the shapes of the bones underneath. It seemed doubtful whether he could go on much longer like this without becoming dangerously ill. And now, very calmly, with that curious wisdom that seems to come so often to small children in times of hardship, he began to make little changes here and there in some of the things that he did, so as to save his strength. In the mornings, he left the house 10 minutes earlier so that he could walk slowly to school without ever having to run. He sat quietly in the classroom during break, resting himself, while the others rushed outdoors and threw snowballs and wrestled in the snow. Everything he did now, he did slowly and carefully to prevent exhaustion, being too tired. Then, one afternoon, walking back home with the icy wind in his face, and incidentally feeling hungrier than he had ever felt before, his eye was caught suddenly by something silvery lying in the gutter in the snow. Charlie stepped off the curb and bent down to examine it. Part of it was buried under the snow, but he saw at once what it was. It was a 50-pence piece. Quickly, he looked around him. Had somebody dropped it? No, that was impossible because of the way part of it was buried. Several people went hurrying past him on the pavement, their chins sunk deep in their collars and their coat, their feet clenching in the snow. None of them was searching for any money. None of them was taking the slightest notice of the small boy crouching in the gutter. Then was it his? This 50-pence? Could he have it? Carefully, Charlie pulled it out from under the snow. It was damp and dirty, but otherwise perfect. A whole 50-pence! He held it tightly between his shivering fingers, gazing down at it. It meant one thing to him at that moment, and one thing only. It meant food! Automatically, Charlie turned and began moving towards the nearest shop. It was only 10 paces away. It was a newspaper and stationery shop, the kind that sells almost everything, including sweets and cigars. And what would he do? He whispered quickly to himself. He would buy one luscious bar of chocolate and eat it all up, every bit of it, right then and there. And the rest of the money he would take straight back and give it to his mother. That's the end of that chapter. Now it's the miracle. I wonder what's going to happen. Charlie entered the shop and laid the damp 50 pence on the counter. One Wonka's Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Mallow Delight, he said, remembering how much he loved the one he had on his birthday. The man behind the counter looked fat and well-fed. He had big lips and fat cheeks and a very fat neck. The fat around his neck bulged out all around the top of his collar, forming a ring, a rubber ring. He turned and reached behind him for the chocolate bar, and then he turned back again and handed it to Charlie. Charlie quickly grabbed it and tore off the wrapper and took an enormous bite. Then he took another and another. And oh, the joy of being able to cram large pieces of something sweet and solid into one's mouth. Remember, he's only been having soup. The sheer blissful joy of being able to fill one's mouth with such rich, solid food. You look like you wanted that one, Sonny, the shopkeeper said pleasantly. Charlie nodded, his mouth bulging with chocolate. The shopkeeper put Charlie's change on the counter. Take it easy, he said. It'll give you a tummy ache if you swallow it like that without chewing. Charlie went on wolfing chocolate. He couldn't stop. And in less than half a minute, the whole thing had disappeared down his throat. He was quite out of breath, but he felt marvelously, extraordinarily happy. He reached out a hand to take the change. Then he paused. His eyes were just above the level of the counter. They were staring at the silver coins lying there. The coins were all 5 penny pieces. There were 9 of them altogether. Surely it wouldn't matter if he just spent one more. I think, he said quietly, I think I'll have just one more of those chocolate bars, the same kind as before, please. Why not? The fat shopkeeper said, reaching behind him again and taking another Whipple Scrumptious Fudge Mallow Delight from the shelf. He laid it on the counter. Charlie picked it up and tore off the wrapper, and suddenly, underneath the wrapper, there was a brilliant flash of gold. Charlie's heart stood still. It's a golden ticket! Screamed the shopkeeper, leaping about a foot in the air. You've got a golden ticket! You found the last golden ticket! Hey, would you believe it? Come, look at this, everybody! The kids found Wonka's last golden ticket. There it is. It's right there in his hands. It seemed as though the shopkeeper might be going to have a fit. In my shop too, he yelled. He found it right here in my own little shop. Somebody call the newspapers quick and let them know. Watch out now, Sonny. Don't tear it as you unwrap it. That thing's precious. In a few seconds, there was a crowd of about 20 people clustering around Charlie, and many more were pushing their way in from the street. Everybody wanted to get a look at the golden ticket and the lucky finder. Where is it? Somebody shouted. Hold it up so we can all see it. There it is. There, someone else shouted. He's holding it in his hands. See the gold shining? How did he manage to find it, I'd like to know, a large boy shouted angrily. 20 bars a day I've been buying for weeks and weeks. Think of all the free stuff he'll be getting too, another boy said enviously. A lifetime supply. He'll need it, the skinny little shrimp. a girl said, laughing. Charlie hadn't moved. He hadn't even unwrapped the golden ticket from the chocolate. He was standing very still, holding it tightly with both hands while the crowd pushed and shouted all around him. He felt quite dizzy. There was a peculiar floating sensation coming over him, as though he were floating up in the air like a balloon. His feet didn't seem to be touching the ground at all. He could hear his heart thumping away loudly somewhere in his throat. At that point, he became aware of a hand resting lightly on his shoulder, and when he looked up, he saw a tall man standing over him. "Listen," the man whispered, "I'll buy it from you. I'll give you 50 pounds. How about it, eh? And I'll give you a new bicycle as well, okay?" "Are you crazy?" shouted a woman who was standing equally close. "What? I'd give him 200 pounds for that ticket. You want to sell that ticket for 200 pounds, young man?" "That's quite enough of that," the fat shopkeeper shouted, pushing his way through the crowd and taking Charlie firmly by the arm. "Leave that kid alone, will you? Make way there. Let him out." And to Charlie, as he led him to the door, he whispered, "Don't let anybody take it. Take it straight home. Quickly, before you lose it. Run all the way and don't stop till you get there. You understand?" Charlie nodded. Hold on one second. All right. And I'm awfully glad you got it. Good luck to you, Sonny. "Thank you," Charlie said. And off he went, running through the snow as fast as his legs would go. And as he flew past Mr. Wonka's factory, he turned and waved at it and sang, "I'll be seeing you. I'll be seeing you soon." And 5 minutes later, he arrived at his home. That's the end of the miracle. He got the golden ticket. Yay! The next one is what it said on the golden ticket. That will be tomorrow, 2:45. What do you think it said on the golden ticket?